Hello and good evening to everybody. My name is Equin Smith, and I am the student chair of the MLK committee. And on behalf of everyone on the committee, I would like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It means a lot to all of us that you continue to support these events because MLK is something that is important to us and something that should be important to Western Carolina University's campus. Before we start the keynote tonight, I would like to welcome Western Carolina University's Inspirational Gospel Choir to the stage. That was absolutely beautiful. Can we give them one more round of applause? Dr. Oralene Graves Simmons, internationally recognized lifetime civil rights leader, is the award-winning visionary founder of Asheville's annual Martin Luther King Jr. Prayer Breakfast and distinguished recipient of the National MLK Commission's Making of the King Holiday Award, presented to her by Miss Coretta Scott King. Miss Oralene Simmons speaks and teaches widely, inspiring audiences locally, nationally, and globally about her journey in civil rights along a path of nonviolence in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A native of Western North Carolina, where she has been a pioneer in the civil rights movement since her school days. Ms. Simmons is a longtime president of the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County and former co-chair of North Carolina State Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission. Ms. Simmons first gained worldwide recognition when she was featured as a young leader in both Jet and Time magazines, and later was honored with Miss Coretta Scott King at the United Nations headquarters in New York City in 1990. Dr. Simmons is the great-granddaughter of Joseph Anderson, a slave who was held as collateral to guarantee a loan that was used to build Mars Hill University, College, now University, in Mars Hill, North Carolina in 1856. 105 years later, Oralene Graves became the first African-American student enrolled at the college. Since then, her daughter and granddaughter have also become alumni. Dr. Simmons is also the recipient of numerous distinguished honors and awards, including Most Outstanding Young Woman of America, North Carolina's Most Distinguished Order of the Longleaf Pine, the Asheville Citizens Times 2016 Women Making History Award / Women Who Have Changed Asheville, and the Leadership Asheville Forum's annual Circle of Excellence Award for Community Leadership and Lifetime Service. In 2015, she was named one of Asheville's Living Treasures. After leaving the Montfort Center in 1997, Dr. Simmons led the YMI Cultural Center as a nonprofit organization under contract with Asheville Parks and Recreation. Since her retirement as a cultural arts supervisor after 27 years of service, she has been active with the Restoration Committee for the Anderson Rosenwald School in Mars Hill and is a public speaker. She studied Kingian nonviolence conflict reconciliation at the University of Rhode Island, and in 2017, she was awarded an honorary Associate of Applied Sciences degree in Community Relations from Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College. In the spring of 2018, Ms. Simmons became Dr. Simmons with the bestowal of an honorary doctorate of Humane Letters from Lenore Ryan University's graduate program in Asheville, North Carolina. And tonight, we have the honor of hearing Dr. Simmons herself as the keynote speaker for this year's 2020 MLK celebration. Please help me welcome Dr. Oralene Graves Simmons to the stage.
Good evening. The story of us, celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am a storyteller, and when I'm asked to speak to a group, I first look for a personal story or an experience of how I can connect with them. I found one for Western University. I was chauffeured here by my grandson, Preston Blakely. I remember telling him a number of years ago that I had received my notice to renew my driver's license, and that this would be the last time I would renew them. He quickly asked, "Well, how are you going to get around?" And I said, "Well, I guess my grandchildren are just going to have to show for me. His reply was, no, we're not going to be here. We'll be in college, moved away, or maybe in the armed service. Preston did go away. He studied and graduated from the North Carolina University at Greensboro with a bachelor's degree in public science and African American studies. He then returned home and enrolled here at this university and graduated with a master's degree in public affairs. He went on and threw his hat in the ring to become the first African American town councilman in Fletcher. And at his victory party with all of his family and friends, folks were toasting him, making speeches and offering congratulations. His father offered a speech, probably thinking that this was going to be the last speech of the night. He said, I was there when Preston was born, and I knew that he would return home, do great things, and serve our community where he grew up. The crowd just applauded. I said to myself, let me make a speech that can top this one. Let grandmother say something profound. What went through my mind was that I had been told when I was very young that you could be president. I knew that this did not mean us, the African Americans here, and us. This was something that was reserved for white people. But I had lived long enough to see an African American occupy the White House, President Barack Obama. So, perched on my high stool, I said, "Hear, hear." I was there too when Preston was born. And I said, he was born for greatness and can be president of the United States of America. The story of us. Now that I have embarrassed him, please welcome him home to this university, the Honorable Preston Blakely, Town Councilman for the town of Fletcher, North Carolina. Let us celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Preston, did I embarrass you so much I can't see you? Please welcome Preston home. Thank you so much. And moving on to the stories about us. Dear Self. Dear Self, I wrote in my book, as I had so many times before. I would climb halfway up the big hill and sit on the large roots of this big oak tree. I was a little girl, and this was my seat in my quiet place. The road had been cleared between the cornfield and the woods. The water rushed down the creek and puddled into the spring. My house sat down in between the two mountains, not another house in sight. I lived there with my grandmother and my uncle. I would sit on my seat and pour my thoughts and feelings into what I call my journey, not journal. It was a book of moving my dreams forward. Sometimes my thoughts were happy ones that made me laugh so loud that I could hear my echo bouncing back. When I grew older and thought I was in love, I wrote love poems. Other times, I could be filled with sadness and fear, and my eyes would fill with tears that fell on the book and curled up the edges of the pages. I would fold my arms around my book and press it in my bosom, knowing that when I reached the bottom of the hill, I would be a different person. Since I always stopped halfway up the hill, I wondered what was on the other side of the mountain. My Uncle Kelly was a hunter and roamed the mountains. I said, "Uncle K, what's on the other side of the mountain?" "Same thing that's on this side of the mountain," he said. "No, really, what's on the other side of the mountain?" Now, if I go up to the top of this hill, look down, I will see a little house sitting in between the two mountains just like this house. Same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain. With disbelief, I took my book, walked past my sitting spot, all the way up to the top of the hill this time. I took a deep breath and then looked over the mountain. There in between the mountains sat a little house that looked just like our house. I walked back down the hill, sat on my seat, and wrote. The same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain. I grew up in rural Madison County in Mars Hill. I walked to the school bus early in the morning. The bus took us to the Anderson Rosenwald School for colored children. We read from the hand-me-down books with the tattered and torn pages. And I loved that school and was proud that my grandmother had been one of his first teachers. As I walked to the bus stop, I often took a shortcut through the campus of Mars Hill College, now university. It made me feel as if I wanted to go to college. It was the only college I knew, so I was going there when I finished high school. I wrote it in my journey. I watched the white college students walk back and forth carrying their books. The only African Americans that I saw were maids and the cooks, janitors, and yardmen. My grandmother took me to the college's amphitheater to see a stage production on Founders Day. I watched a white student in paper chains with his face painted black being led off the stage by another student. I was full of questions for my grandmother when we arrived home. She told me that the student with the black painted face was portraying my great-great-grandfather going to prison. Was he going to prison because he didn't wash his face? And were the paper chains his decorations? I learned that he was a former slave named Joe Anderson, and he was owned by Jesse Woodson Anderson, a member of the board of trustees of the school. He and Joe had the same last name. I later learned that history books and archival documents told the story of how the school's board of trustees had underestimated the construction cost of the building, and when the contractor came to collect the final payment of $1,000, they found themselves embarrassed. The treasury was empty. A lien was placed on the building. The contractor and the sheriff decided that Joe, the slave, the skilled brick maker, would be held as collateral until the lien was paid off. Declared as human property, he was chained and led away to prison in Buncombe County. If the money was not paid in 4 days, Joe would be sold at the auction block to the highest bidder, leaving his family behind. The story of Joe Anderson, the former slave of Morris Hill, who went to prison for Morris Hill's college debt in 1859, has made press throughout our nation and Europe. According to Ripley's Believe It or Not, his imprisonment is the only case known where human flesh and blood went to prison for an institution, Morris Hill College. Fortunately for Joe and his family in Morris Hill, the money was raised and the debt was paid. After the Civil War came freedom for Joe, his family, and their future. His former slave owner, Jesse Woodson Anderson, gave the family property to live on. Joe's life was productive until he passed away in the early 1900s. He was buried in the family plot, and in 1930, his remains were taken home to the college campus, where a marker still remains now. This story of slavery just made me so sad. Why slavery? If we are Andersons, then where are these other Andersons, the white Andersons? Could I find them? What would I say to them now? I wrote. After elementary school, it was time to rise early and board that bus that would take us to Asheville, the 45-mile round trip. We passed many schools, but our bus could not stop there because of the color of our skins. I was excited about going to the big new school. I wanted to make new friends and study hard. I was the new girl in school, and many of the students told me that they could not play with me because I looked like a white girl and talked funny. My teacher told them that I should sit alone at the table in the cafeteria at lunchtime, adding that I thought I was better, was fast, and walking with my head in the air and switching when I walked. They had no way of knowing that I had a spinal deformity, that my head tilts up, and one leg is a fraction of an inch shorter than the other one, that causes a shifting in my walk. I learned humility comes along with self-esteem. That humility that comes with the inner strength of peace. It is the humility of knowing who I am and loving myself and loving others at the same time, I wrote. I lived in Asheville with my mother while I was a student at Stevens Lee High School and no longer rode the school bus. I became a member of ASCORA. I stood up and took a seat at the lunch counter, joining in with the sit-in demonstrations during the Civil Rights era. I helped to integrate the public library and other public facilities. Learning how to conduct myself in a nonviolent way for peaceful movement for human dignity, I gained skills. Remembering my dreams of black and white students walking across the campus of Morris Hill University together, I chose Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as my hero. His message of human dignity, nonviolence, equality resonated with me. High school graduation was approaching, And my classmates talked about where they had applied for college. Now was my time to reveal my dream. So I spoke up and said, I'm going to Mars Hill College. One person said, where? I never heard of that college. Another classmate laughed and said, that's that white college in that little town where she's from. Who she thinks she is? Why does she think that she can go to a white school? And they laughed and they laughed. I'm Joe Anderson's great-great-granddaughter. I'm graduating with honors, and I will show you, I said to myself. In April of 1961, I completed the application for admission to Mars Hill College, and I waited for a reply. I waited, and I waited, and I waited. Finally, it arrived. I was just so excited, I tore open the letter, and it read, we're not accepting any applications at this time. And something about you can reapply again next year if you're still interested. That was a disappointment of that dream. But I did think about the conditions of the South, with buses being burned and churches bombed. Feelings about blacks entering all-white schools ran high in the South. My classmates were going away to colleges in the eastern part of the state. Now, I can just go away with them, and all of this pressure about being a first would be behind. Then I discovered that other students were being accepted at Mars Hill University as late as June. I got the picture, the whole picture. I only had to look in the mirror for the answer. I decided to push a little more. And a special meeting of the college's Board of Trustees was convened. A new decision was made. Yes, they would accept my application as a student. My story received national and international attention, with a story in Time magazine and Jet magazine, the New York Times newspaper. A reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times newspaper showed up at my door, and I wanted to interview me on being the first Negro to enter this all-white institution. I remember it was the 5th day of July, and I had just jumped back into my 4th of July outfit, psychedelic pantsuit, pink rollers in my hair, busy doing my work. The reporter said, come outside and let me take your picture. Like this, I said. Yes, I think you just look cute, pink hair rollers and all. No, I don't think so, I said. Come back at 12 o'clock noon. I'll give you a picture and an interview too. And when he arrived, I was sitting on my front steps with my white graduation dress on, and my curls were clustered about my head. As a Mars Hill College student, I learned the stark realities between the former slave buried on the hill above the campus, who was hailed as a hero, and me, the student who suffered the indignities, threats, and harassments of being told, you do not belong here because of the color of your skin. I wrote in my journey every day. I moved into Treat Dormitory for girls, but not until some of the other students moved out. They did not want to sleep in the same building with a Negro. I held on to this thought. Just remember why you're here. But how was I supposed to study at night in a dormitory room with the window that led out onto the porch? The white students would gather there on the porch in the evening and talk about that person that lives in that room. There were the threats of bricks coming through my window. One guy yelled out, "I got a rope. Let's drag her out and hang her from this big tree." College officials warned me not to go out after dark for my safety, not even to the cafeteria for food or library to study. Finally, there was one brave student who volunteered to be my big sister. Her name was Becky. I then had someone to walk with me after dark, and when she was not available, her boyfriend walked with me. They were both condemned for having befriended me. The end of the first school year was approaching, and I had one more thing to do. I asked my dormitory mother if I could be the speaker at our last pajama party. I told her that I wanted to tell my dormitory mates just how much I appreciated them with all their kindness during my stay with them. I told them, "You had the experience of staying under the same roof with a Negro. You can go back home, tell your family and your communities that I did not clean your room, shine your shoes, steal anything from you, or slip into your room to knife you in the back after dark. Please tell them that I am a student and that I have a sister named Becky, and I wanted you to be my sister too. Tell them that I want an education with fair employment and not my name on the welfare roll. And by the way, I'll be back again next year, and I'm bringing somebody else with me. And other African Americans will follow." The next day was going home day. I wanted to run down the block, turn the corner, and be in the outside world again. I was going home. Once on the outside, people wanted to know, "Hey, how they treat you out there?" They waited for a brutal story of persecution. I did not have one for them then, and I do not have one for them now. There are stories that I would never tell. I was a student. And even today, some people ask, "Would you do that again? Did they want you there? Did you suffer? How much sleep did you get? How did you study? How many times were you threatened? You went to that school in 1961 and even today. You wake up with that same old nightmare and the water trickles down your back. And when you return home, your own people, the black, the African American, so-called colored people, also condemned you for having been the first black to enter an all-white school, saying, 'Who does she think she is?' Now, in the heat of the civil rights movement, would you do that again? Would you do that again?" I would do it again. I would do it today. I did it yesterday for my children and your children, our grandchildren, black and white, and Preston Blakely. Because you need me, but I need you. Dr. King was right when he said, we're all tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all directly. You can never be what you are to be until I am what I are to be. And in 1995, my daughter Oralene Simmons Blakely became a graduate of Mars Hill University. And furthermore, in 2009, Shamil Cherry, my granddaughter and seventh generation descendant of Joe Anderson, graduated from the university. In 1999, the former slave, Joe Anderson, was honored. Our family was recognized and celebrated as a founding family of the university. Now, I had attended the Founders Day banquet year after year, where we sat at separate tables. I would always look for that other Anderson table, that Jesse Woodson Anderson table. Years passed by of hoping and looking. Then a telephone call came in the middle of the night. It was from a lady in Hawaii. And she asked me, do you know a Jesse Woodson Anderson? I answered, yes, what about him? Thinking it was just another reporter looking for a pretty story. She just straight up said it. My name is Susie Anderson, and my great-great-grandfather, Jesse Woodson Anderson, was your great-great-grandfather's slave owner. I said, would you repeat that, please? She said, please don't hang up the phone. I've been on a national search looking for you. And I just wanted to say, I hope that my grandpa was not mean to your grandpa. I caught onto the kitchen sink to steady myself. My tears were falling on the floor as I searched for something to say. I told her how Jesse lost all of his possessions after the Civil War and gave Joe, the former slave, and his family his farm to live on. Jesse moved to an apartment in Asheville. Their friendship was priceless, as Joe cared for him until his death. Maybe one day we will find out why. Susie said that her last name was Anderson, too. She came forward with the words of apologies for the indignities that my family had suffered because of slavery and segregation. She said, please forgive us. I hung up the phone and more tears came. I cried all the emotions that had been pent up inside of me for all those years. I had wanted someone from the other Anderson family to just say those words. I wanted someone to say, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I poured all of my thoughts into my journey, and the tears continued to fall and curl up the pages of my book. I had attended Founders Day, always looking for someone from that other Anderson family. I wanted to sit down at the table, sit across from them, I didn't know what I was going to say, but I wanted to have that conversation. Susie and I became friends through our phone calls and our emails. Would you believe it? She decided to visit me in North Carolina, and we researched our families together. She's doing one side of the Anderson family. I'm doing the other side of the Anderson family. We found stories that made us laugh, and we found stories that made us cry. We put together files and documents and then placed the leaves on our trees. Our trees grew. The branches started overlapping and crossing and overlapping. Susie screamed with excitement. We are cousins. I knew it. I just knew we were cousins. You are my little cousin. And she planted a kiss on my cheek. I now had someone to go with me to the Founders Day banquet. We walked together, hand in hand, sat at the same table. The descendant of the slave owner and the descendant of the former slave. We continue our relationship today, each realizing that there are so many questions of why and how as we continue to research together. Our bond continues to bring us closer as one Anderson, realizing our similarities and our differences. I amended my birth certificate and added the name Anderson. I am Oralene Anderson Graves Simmons. I often wondered how long I would be remembered at Mars Hill University. Recently, the students of Mars Hill University, along with the NAACP chapter, founding families, and university administrators, unveiled a weeping willow tree in the Joe Anderson Park on Joe Anderson Boulevard, located on the campus of Mars Hill University. Inscribed on the permanent plaque, it reads, in honor of Oralene Anderson Graves Simmons, the first African-American student and the great-great-granddaughter of Joseph Anderson. Now, I recorded this in my journey with laughter. Now, the pages in this book are really the pages of my heart. There are pages of joy that echo back to me, pages that are torn down, some retracted, tear-stained, and curled up at the end, and some waiting to be filled. I have my seat on the roots of the old oak tree, and I can turn back the pages and read. The same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain. Now, you have a journey, and recorded in the pages of your heart are peace, justice, and freedom for all. And when we take our wisdom of hope from these mountains to our shores, to the corners of the nation, to the world, the peace, the justice, and freedom for all. And how do we go? In a nonviolent way. This story of us in the United States, celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is my journey. May peace be your journey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you for having me. It was an honor, a pleasure. It's
So I just want to thank you for making the trip over here and making this night special for us. I want to thank all of the university officials that made the time to come out here tonight. I want to thank the MLK committee for planning these events. This means a lot for all people on this campus, and I want to continue doing these things in the future. I want to thank all of the groups that help host these events this week. I want to thank the Bardo staff for allowing us to use their space and all of the departments that help us sponsor everything. Thank you. We're going to take some questions from the audience, and Takis is walking around with the mic. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and she'll come to you. Once again, thank everyone for coming out.
yes. We're cousins. Dear friend of me, of mine, and he works on my Martin Luther King celebration committee, and it was like he kind of took Preston on his wing, and he became his political manager. And he told me that his brother had come up as a match for me, that we were close cousins, and I had seen it, I didn't pay it, I don't know this man, I just passed along. And then when Preston got his, then it came in that the same guy is also my cousin. He acted pretty quiet, and I just love him. I just love him so much, and he was just so excited. And then I got the email from his wife that said, "I'm your cousin too. We're not blood related, but yeah, we're cousins. We're cousins." Yes, there have been lots of surprises. I know when I was younger, it was like I just really wanted to be related to anybody. And my mother was about the same way, because I would ask her about certain people. I said, we're so like, oh, no, I'm not related to anybody but my mother and my brother in Mars Hill. So I kind of had that attitude, and lo and behold, it's like I'm probably related to everybody living in Mars Hill, and then their relatives went away. It's such a small town, and in the neighboring counties of Burnsville, and some far away. I tell you, I think one of the biggest disappointment to me, and it goes back to what was in my story of people telling me what color I am, and I know what color I am. And it was like, she's half, she's white, she's black. There was always this thing in my head, and I always said, I'm black. I can't go to the white school. My birth certificate says I'm black. My school record, Social Security, everything says I'm black. No, I can't do those things. And then I took the DNA, and it came back, and I said, oh, I can finally say I'm black, and I got all these percentages from of the African countries and everything. I said, they're all just going to come in, and they're just going to all line up for me. I got it, and I opened it up, and I'm like 49% 90% one, 51% the other. No, I just cried. I just cried. I just cried. As I said earlier, I'm a child of God. Child of God. Is there somebody else there?
Anyone else? No? Well, yes, we saw a hand. Do you need the mic or do you have a voice just like this?
I can just speak.
All right.
You said in your speech that that there are stories that you don't feel obliged or comfortable to say. Could you expand on those thoughts a little bit?
Would I do what?
Expand on your thoughts. Is that based on your learning the Martin Luther King Jr. legacy, or is that just your feeling that there are experiences that you don't feel comfortable or don't want to relate?
Not yet, not at this time, and I am beginning to tell more and more things that I have not talked about. There at one time, she was like, I didn't want to talk about that at all. Not at all. When I go out of the house, I wore this black scarf over my head and shaved on. I just didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it anymore. You know, that's enough. I did what I did, and I'm going on. There is one other reason that I don't. When I left Marsville, and then I went back because we wanted to make peace. We wanted to make peace with each other about what had happened, and me feeling that they didn't really always protect me. We had this come to Jesus conversation, and I promised them that I would never ever say anything that would bring embarrassment or shame on the university. I don't have to do that. I did what I did. I know why I did it, and I know who I did it. I know who I did it for. Yeah. Even though, today I have those. I have those friends. They still haven't gone away. I've even done some counseling around it. There are so many people who tell me, "Oh, get over it. Get over it." Yes.
I'm a professor, and I teach majority white students. You mentioned I teach in special education, so I train teachers. Yeah.
Okay.
And you mentioned there was a phrase you used. You talked about your experience being a first.
Being a what?
A first, kind of you were that first. Yeah.
Yes.
And so I was just, if I hold it differently, you can hear better. Sorry. I teach majority white students, but I want to when I don't just have white students in my class. Can you speak to me about your wisdom and advice on teaching minority students in my classes? Because you maybe saw what it might not need to be like. So if you could speak to me with wisdom and advice, I'd appreciate it. No, my college classes.
Oh, your college class is about
special education.
special.
I see most of us are going to teach majority white students, and can you give us advice about when we have a unique student, when we have a first student in our class, and how we can teach well? If I was your teacher and you had been there, what advice would you give to me about how to teach you better?
Well, I think one thing is don't try too hard in supporting this African American in your class of all white students. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. I would say, I would probably have this private conversation not so much about, I'm gonna be good and kind to you, and I want everybody else in here to love you, that's just not it. But I would, try to have that conversation with them. And I would say, don't go overboard and show all of this, if you're in the classroom, because it would probably cause more attention. And when that gets more attention to them, the other students become afraid that this particular person is getting more of your attention, more of your time, and they just might not be as nice and as kind. I remember one of my teachers, PE teachers, Coach Hart. I think I liked her more than I did any of the other teachers, because she treated me just like she treated everybody else. She was hollering everybody's name, get there, because she didn't tell the white students, oh, you all sit down over here when she gets through. She said, oh, you sit down? I'd say, try to be that well-rounded person, but also be sensitive to what some of the white students might say or what they might bring. And please remember, sometimes white students in situations like that, they become afraid that this person might get extra attention. This person might be the person that gets a higher education from me. This person might be the person that's going to get that job that I wanted. Yeah, they have a fear. And when they do that, they wound the black person. They are wounded that way because of the way that they treat them, and it can come out in little funny, crazy ways that are so subtle. But that person will know because it hurts.
Thank you once again, Dr. Simmons. On behalf of Western Carolina University, it was a